Welcome to another episode of the Modern Facilities Management Podcast, brought to you by Stratum. I'm your host, Griffin Hamilton. This is the show where I interview industry experts who share their stories, strategies, and insights into modern-day facilities management. From hospitality to commercial real estate and everything in between, we'll learn what it really takes to succeed as a facilities manager.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Modern Facilities Management Podcast. Today, we have a unique show. We've got three guests on. We have Chris Sockriter, Kevin Pollock, and Joe Sharp. And we are going to have a panel discussion on the impacts of COVID in the hospitality space. Having three experts joining us. Again, appreciate all three of you guys joining. Chris, we'll start out with you. Why don't you give an introduction on who you are and who you work for?
Yeah, so again, my name is Chris Sockriter, work for SoDel Concepts. We're a hospitality group in Lower Delaware. We've got 13 hard locations, restaurants, and then we have three all-state sports facilities that we do the catering for. We manage all the facilities here. And you were mentioning earlier about how we got into it. It's kind of a roundabout story. Started out as a technician and then kind of worked my way into the facility side. So pretty standard.
Yeah. And Joe, why don't you go from there?
Sure. I'm Joe Sharp. I work for Meadowbrook Restaurants. We are a franchisee for both the Zaxby's brand and Dairy Queen restaurant Grill and Chill. Historically, I'm an operations manager by trade, came out of the furniture industry and was just through a unique set of circumstances brought into the restaurant field. Then became a technician, did it in the opposite order as Chris did. And 5.5 years later, here we are, and very glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you. And Kevin, why don't you wrap us up?
Yeah, currently work for a licensee of Zaxby's called Dream Big. We have stores in the Atlanta area. And prior to that, I've been in the restaurant industry for many, many years, dealing with both QSR, family restaurant, fast casuals. And so been with Zaxby's brand here in Atlanta for about a year and a half.
Got it. Well, again, I want to thank you three for joining. I know last year, I don't really have to dive into too much detail on the challenges that not only restaurant and hospitality industry faced, but just in general, 2020 was rough on all of us. But in particular, hospitality really had it hard. A lot of shutdowns, a lot of new regulations, and something that no one was prepared for. And with that, Chris, why don't you kind of lead us off here and kind of taking your perspective on the impacts of COVID on SoDel and the different concepts that you guys have up in there in Delaware.
Yeah, so uniquely, we have 13 locations, but we mainly operate out of one county of Delaware. So even though we have a lot of locations, we're not as spread out. And when we got hit, it was all the same regulations. So I guess fortunately for us, we didn't have to really go back and forth between what Maryland was doing or Virginia or anything like that. It was just what Delaware was doing. But we got shut down in March completely. And then within a couple weeks, we were back up to takeout only. And our locations specifically weren't geared towards that. That wasn't kind of our main thing. We are, typically sit down, more casual dining. And it was a bit of a challenge to kind of revamp what we did. And in some of our locations, we had, to-go programs and things like that, but nothing to the extent of what we really needed to ramp up to make it successful. So the first month was just spent trying to gear up all the locations and shift tables around and kind of make our own little spaces to do our to-go orders and how the kitchens were going to run and what the menus are going to look like and all that stuff. So I remember distinctly a lot of conversation around what we were going to do and how we were going to do it. But with a lot of the different locations, that creates a lot of different fun things that we had to work through. I remember the chefs talking about, how they were going to package the food and, you know, finding and securing all the sanitizing equipment and the different, you know, PPE that we had to find and all that kind of stuff. We were looking at one point at barrels of sanitizer because you couldn't get them in the small things. So um, it was definitely interesting from a facility side. We started immediately looking at, how do we sanitize the restaurants for our staff, um, and that led us on a whole crazy, thing of what we were going to do and how we were going to do it. We hired a couple of outside contractors to come in, um, and saw kind of what they were doing, and you know, kind of tried to adapt that on a day to day basis on how we could do it a little more effectively and a little more cost effectively. So, but it was definitely a challenge for sure.
Yeah, and what's interesting is SoDel has, as you mentioned, several sit down concepts there. And Joe, with you managing operations and facilities for Zaxby's and Dairy Queen, you guys were built for, or you had that the infrastructure in place already for to go and takeout. So how did that look for Zaxby's and Dairy Queen?
Well, for us specifically, uh, we were very blessed. There was obviously a huge assessment and growth, like how do we adapt to what's going on? But the reality is we were already 65+% takeout and drive through. So what we saw was an immediate dip, obviously. Georgia here, I'm about an hour north of Atlanta, and Kevin and I shared the same regulatory system. It was, I don't want to say it was relaxed, but they didn't force you to shut down. They just made it that you would choose to. So we did end up closing our dining rooms for about 2.5 months, just because the staffing situation, which we're all still dealing with, I'm sure, became, non-tenable to say, well, if I have to do this every 5 minutes and I have to. So when we closed our dining rooms, I was shocked to see that after a month, our sales literally caught back up to on par, so that we were running full day sales through the drive only, which meant you were doing it with less people, which was fortunate because there were less people to pull from. So from a crushing perspective, COVID-19 did not throw huge wrenches into my personal situation here. In fact, I was able to use it to my benefit because for those 2.5 months, we painted the dining rooms, we redid the furniture, we did the things that I can't ever do because we're always open, and so yeah, that's personally we staffing was the big thing, right? Just the people. But as far as the operation of it goes, we were very blessed that from a regulatory standpoint, you know, Chris hit all the big points, right? Gloves. Can we find gloves? Can we find sanitizer? Nope. So how do you address those? But that's non-unique. I think everyone here's dealt with those.
Yeah, and Kevin, would you say that even being a couple hours south, did you guys have the same experience? Having that very quick shutdown of, okay, this is something unique. The whole world is turned upside down, and now it's going to take a couple months to get ramped back up because we already have this infrastructure in place.
Yeah, I would say Joe's right on. In our experience, we never closed. Being QSR, he's right. Up to 70% of our business was already through the drive-through. Our challenges initially were, and as an ownership group, we decided we were not going to cut labor. We actually invested more labor into the drive-through. So we didn't, and at that point, we weren't struggling like we are today with the staffing situation, but we dedicated a lot of labor. At the same time, the company was on a major third-party delivery program. So we got a few more third-party delivery. And so we had some stores that are doing weekly and just delivery and online what a normal QSR may do on a lower volume on a weekly basis. So it created a lot of evolutionary changes that we had to adapt to. Today, our lobbies still have never reopened. And during that time, up until recently, during that time, we were up double digit in sales. We were decreasing our speed of service numbers. We were getting great service. We offered curbside delivery up at that point too, where we run it out for you so to save as a convenience to the guest. So we adapted in ways like that. What Joe alluded to now is probably our biggest challenge is now we're struggling with the staffing situation. And while we're able to open up our dining rooms, we don't have the staffing to be able to do so. And Joe's absolutely right too. I have relatives in New Jersey, and I have a lot of partners that I talk to in the business in like New Jersey and New York, and uh, Georgia was very relaxed as far as the restrictions throughout the country.
Yeah, and I mean, we look around, and I'm here in Atlanta with you guys, and it has been very relaxed, and we are very fortunate from that standpoint where we have, you guys have made the decision to just keep it closed. It's not like you've been forced to close down your restaurant there. And Chris, throwing it back to you, what's the status in Delaware right now? Are you guys at 50% capacity, or is it up to the restaurant?
Yeah, so we're still at 75% capacity. And it's weird because a lot of the states around us are going to 100% capacity with the spacing requirements still in place. For some reason, we're not quite there yet. We've gotten some of the bar seating back. They've relaxed a little bit on the parties and how big the party size can be and stuff like that. But it's been ever changing. I think that the last I looked, there was 30. We had a state of emergency order that came out from the governor, and I believe there was like 31 or 32, versions of that he kept changing things as we went. So it's tough to keep up with, what is happening when. And fortunately for us, our front office is kind of taking the brunt on that deal. Our PR people and everybody who's in the operation side of the restaurants, they've been dealing with that, much more intimately than I have. But yeah, we're still not quite all the way back. And it's weird because in our area, we call it down south, like Fenwick Island, more of a resort town and more, relaxed than, maybe up in Lewis or Rehoboth area. And even the towns had a little bit different way of dealing with things, not necessarily on the restaurant front, but just in general, So I felt like when we first did this last summer, you could definitely tell a difference between Fenwick Island and how people were down there versus up in the north a little bit farther, and how people were kind of up here. And we're still kind of seeing that throughout all of our concepts. But yeah, the state of it right now, I would say, is just people are ready to come back out. They're ready to get back into the restaurants. We're seeing a lot of people that we haven't seen for a year. So I think it's slowly coming back, but we're not quite there all the way back yet.
Yeah, I think we could all say that we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, not to rub it in, Chris, but I think Kevin, Joe, and myself have been seeing that for a couple months now. So, but hopefully, as a country, we're getting to that point. But Joe and Kevin mentioned that staffing has been the biggest issue, and they continue to see that issue. Now, that's nothing new in the restaurant space. That's always going to be the case. But would you say that's your biggest issue up in Delaware, or would you say having to follow the 30 some odd regulations that have been thrown at you has been more challenging than that?
Yeah, I think that, throughout this whole thing, there's been challenge after challenge after challenge. For us, and you guys were definitely fortunate to have the drive-through business and the to-go business kind of already set up. For us, it was trying to figure out, as these regulations came down, it was trying to figure out how to maximize what we were given. So obviously you can fight all you want, but when the governor says you only get 50% capacity, that's what you got. So I think for us, it was trying to figure out, how to reorganize our table settings and how to reorganize the restaurants and what we could and couldn't do to get that 50% safely in the restaurant. And that was really, for the first 6-8 months of what we were doing was just trying to, build barriers and figure out how to put people back to back safely and try to maximize what we were given. And staffing for sure, we definitely have a little bit of a shortage. I don't think it's nearly as bad here as it is maybe down there. We've did kind of the same thing that Kevin talked about. We kind of doubled down on our staff, and really pushed to kind of keep them in and keep them involved. And the people that work with us and stayed working with us full time for years, we really tried to make a place for them in our to-go models, and we definitely had our curbside, carry out and things like that. So as we kind of tweaked and revamped things, we made space for a lot of those people. So we don't have it quite as bad. And I haven't seen restaurants that like haven't opened yet because they're having staffing shortages, but there's definitely a push to hire right now. And that's, for us being seasonal, that's kind of normal anyway. So I wouldn't say it's our biggest challenge. I think the biggest challenge right now is just, we're in a waiting game with the government to see kind of when we can get back to 100%. But I don't think we're nearly as bad off staffing as it sounds like you guys might be.
Yeah, and you mentioned all of you have hit on this as far as takeout and just how you guys had to adjust to the regulations in place, whether it's in here in Atlanta or up in Delaware. But regardless, the customer, their experience has changed and has probably been impacted ongoing. Do you foresee, Kevin, that the customer habit of going into a restaurant changing after having a year of just takeout for the most part?
I think it's very potential that we're going to be looking at a new norm. We are just now, because of staffing, as we're trying to reopen our lobbies and ease back into it, we're going to discontinue the curbside and ask our third-party delivery and anyone who uses the online app to come inside. Most of that's being driven by the fact that it's a staffing situation, so we don't have to have a runner out there. We've tested it 1 week so far in one of our stores, and I thought we'd get a lot of customer complaints. We have not gotten one customer complaint. I think they're happy to come inside. We have had some issues where we've asked guests to have a mask as a requirement, and because we have such relaxed regulations here, we get a lot of folks coming in without a mask. And we try to do the right thing and take care of them, but we're really about protecting our employees more than anything at this point.
Yeah, and Joe, you're sitting here shaking your head.
Yeah, so similarly, our dining rooms did open up right away, and I am in a very non-masking area. It's not required, right? They're very optional, and we know how polarizing that conversation is. We, as Kevin said, we had to think long and hard when the regulations dropped. What do we want to do? What do we want to speak to our people, right? What do we want them to know what's important? And so we, even still today, we're in masks unnecessarily from a legal perspective, but we had to weigh out what's the harm, right? Which one is more harmful? If our staff is not in masks and the guests come in and really think that's irresponsible and we're putting these kids and their families at risk, that's tangibly harmful. The flip side was we're in masks and people who think masks are completely unnecessary are going to be in the dining room going, why are these fools in masks? That's a lot less harmful. So when it comes down to it, we chose to keep the masks on, which, we all know is a double challenge in the kitchen. But yeah, we are the only ones with masks in our buildings. Our guests to 90% are not in masks. They were ready to get back out as soon as places started opening up. And again, I understand for Kevin, we are actually approaching Kevin's situation now to where we have to contemplate which restaurant do we close the dining room so we can distribute those employees to keep the other ones open, because it is a critical employee issue right now. And again, we didn't lay anyone off, right? It was never, much to what Chris said. From a maintenance perspective, I actually brought on a full-time and part-time facility person with me during COVID, and we struggle, putting pie in the sky ads out there saying, we'll pay you, $14 an hour if you can come and work 30 hours a week, and there's no traction. So that's when it became, very evident as I talked with, you guys on other calls that, wow, it's not just this area, this specific problem. This is a universal issue right now.
Yeah. And you mentioned the customers that are coming in right now, are you seeing a pickup in that just to go in and sit down? And are you projecting that to be the case as well, where it evens out or gets back to, pre 2020 numbers where your ratio of to go and pick up and dine in are going to be back to normal?
I mean, so, and Kevin also said our third party services went through the roof. The amount of Grubhub, Uber Eats, DoorDash, you name them, is flying out of our restaurants, overcoming, again, there's no loss anyway. And this is in addition to. So I think the people who aren't comfortable coming out, still want their Zaxby's, still want their Dairy Queen, still want what they want. And there are systems in place to help that. I don't, who knows with the economic climate of things, right? Are things going to settle down and people stop, or are they just on this crazy spending spree out of, we've been locked down for so long, let's just go, and they go crazy. I mean, our dining rooms are packed for lunch, they're packed for dinner. Large families like we've never seen, instead of just the two offs at a table, which compounds the crushing employee problem, right? Plus 20% sales, minus 10% of labor. It just doesn't compute.
I think it's definitely going to change the way people dine in the future. I think there are other concepts out there, larger QSR concepts, that have noticed that and are willing to change the footprint of their design for buildings to go to possibly drive-through onlys or much smaller dine-in areas, because I think the customers change, not to mention the cost of building these square footage buildings is quite costly. And I think the customers, with the third party especially, they like the fact that they can have it come to them when they want it. So in that respect, I do believe we're going to see the future change. I don't think we need the lobbies that we currently have to be successful. That being said, like Joe said, I do believe there's a portion of the people, my wife and I being one of them, I like to go in and I want to sit down and I want to enjoy a meal. I think we're at least 2 months away before we're even in a position to do that at our locations. So, and we want to do it strategically, like Joe was talking about. We don't want to have a guest one day be able to use the lobby and the next day not be able to. So we've been very strategic at how we're going to do it. And that's why I'm saying we're easing into it right first with the third party delivery, letting them come in and get their food. And because right now, when we look at our staffing, probably 99% of them were hired before a lobby was ever after a lobby was closed. So they don't even know what operation looks like when the operation is open. So there would be a whole new training piece that needs to go into this.
Yeah. And Chris, with the different concepts that you guys have, the change that Kevin just brought up as far as having, concepts just based solely off of drive-through or to go, and having these very small, brick and mortar locations, what are you guys doing as you look ahead? How are you changing the strategy as you're looking ahead from that standpoint?
Yeah, so I give our ownership a lot of credit on this. So we, in the process of COVID, we've been designing another restaurant, something that we want to build. And we had these meetings where, we're talking about to-go areas and how we're going to incorporate that into our designs and things like that. So, we definitely, at least if nothing else, it's caused us to kind of take a step back and look at the future and say, well, is it something that we need to consider long-term or not? As far as the customers go, we've definitely seen people as the restaurants have opened back up inside. We've definitely seen the people that, forego getting their curbside delivery, and they've come in the restaurants to eat. So we're, in our concepts, that's really where the experience lives. And that's really what, sets us apart in some ways from the other locations around here, is that dining experience inside. So we don't want to lose that. And so we're not trying to push the business in that way. But at the same time, and I'm guilty of this as well, for a family of 5 that would normally not go to a higher end restaurant because of trying to wrangle kids and get them all in seats and keep them there and all that stuff, it's nice to be able to pull up to, a fairly nice restaurant and get a nice steak and some seafood to go and eat it with your kids running around like crazy. So I think that, it definitely has made us think harder about how we're going to operate moving forward. And I think you guys touched on as well. We've had a couple locations that really pushed all the chips into the to go and to the curbside carry out stuff. And we've seen it explode in certain places. Of course, some of our restaurants, it just didn't translate, and it wasn't, quite the same as the inside experience. So it didn't work out. But some of our locations, it really went well. And now we're working on trying to figure out, making those areas more permanent. And now that the dining rooms are opening back up, some of those dining rooms were never meant to have, carry out areas. So we're trying to fit those things in and make them look like part of the restaurant, not an afterthought. So yeah, I think it's definitely changed our model. It's definitely changed how the conversations go, and especially moving forward into the new restaurant stuff. It's definitely caused us to take a step back and figure on having some of that stuff built in more.
Yeah, and in looking at it from kind of retrofitting what you just mentioned, as far as having to change the aesthetics and the FM or operations management capacity, I mean, that's on your shoulders, right? And so the three of you had the position that I'm not envious of having to get creative and think of different solutions to this pandemic. So what have you guys been doing to really adjust to this new norm that we've been living in?
I'll start, man. So we did a whole bunch of stuff in trying to get the restaurants back up to that percentage stuff that we talked about, and trying to make use of, if we had at one point we had 25% capacity, and it kind of leveled out at 50 for quite a while. But back to back booths, we were allowed to have the booths, but you had to have some sort of physical barrier between the backs of each person. So we retrofitted all of our restaurants with specifically built pieces to go on those booths that matched the themes and the feel of the restaurant. A lot of people in our area, especially, one of the funniest examples was an Outback down the road from us had these like cardboard print out. They looked like wood, but they really weren't wood, and it just kind of looked like an afterthought. And we were trying to stay ahead of stuff like that and make it seem like we were at least putting some thought into it and trying to protect the guests and making sure that they felt comfortable. And at one point, when you walk in the restaurants and there were booths back to back to back, and it just looked like these little pods that people were sitting in. But we got rave reviews on them. So we kind of listened to the customers as well. And even as crazy as we thought some of the stuff was, we would try it out and find out that they really felt safe in there. They felt like they were taken care of. And they, the more we could do that, the better we felt like, we were going to do long term. So that was a huge thing. We put up, we have a lot of outside areas, some really big outside areas that we use in the summertime. We rented tents, did some creative things on trying to get them in place, and heaters underneath of them, and outdoor spaces with heaters. Even into December and January, February, we still had people sitting outside with heat running. So we had to solve problems with propane deliveries and buying and assembling a bunch of heaters and keeping them running. So it was and still is a massive challenge, just trying to keep up with what our customers really wanted out of us, and being able to maximize the opportunities that were in front of us. And then, like I said, we took the opportunity, kind of like what Joe said, when you have the opportunity to do some things in the restaurant, you want to take them. So we did the same thing. We started working on some renovation stuff and floors, and some equipment that we wanted to get changed out and stuff like that. So we kind of doubled down on the inside of the facilities as well. So it's been a busy stretch, pretty much from last summer, rolling through into now. It's been busy.
Now, were you relying, or did you have anyone that you could fall back on and bounce ideas off of, like in your network or in the community?
Yeah. So as far as from a facilities perspective, no. We, and I'm fortunate to work with really great people, and a lot of them on the restaurant operations side. We have our weekly meetings anyway. We meet, Mondays and Fridays. So we would use those meetings to kind of bounce these ideas back and forth. And somebody would say, well, we want to do some sort of barrier. And then I would say, okay, well, this is what's possible and this is what we can do. And here's who we can contract to do it. And here's roughly what I think the cost would be. And then we kind of bounce back and forth on, yeah, that'll work, or no, it won't work, or yeah, it's too expensive, or no, it looks crazy. We also are fortunate enough to have a design team. So we have two people whose job it is to make sure that all of our restaurants are cohesive and that they make sense and it doesn't have some weird thing stuck in the middle of the dining room. So, as much of a pain as they are to me, we love them and they do a great job. So we were able to bounce ideas off of them. So it really became very collaborative on, solving each of these little things as they came up. And each of us had to give a little bit on the end product, and it maybe wasn't as cheap or wasn't as fast as I wanted it to be, but it was, the right look for the restaurant. So I would say that our internal team was really, we worked quite a lot on making sure all that stuff came together.
Kevin, what did you guys do down here?
Well, we didn't reopen the lobby, so we didn't do any kind of design work. We did have things drawn up. We did get estimates and bids, and we didn't go that far because it was quite costly. I feel for Chris having to do that. I'm sure it wasn't cheap, and your sales are down. So we were kind of like, well, let's see. We were up double digit through drive-through only, but one of the things we did invest quite a bit of money in was we did have a third party vendor come in and sanitize the buildings on a quarterly, if not monthly basis, depending where we were. We invested some deep cleaning as well during this time. And so we did put quite a bit of dollars out into maintaining the safety and sanitation of our facilities during this time.
Yeah, and Joe, you mentioned earlier that you guys invested in adding headcount. So it sounds like the three of you guys work for organizations that viewed this as an opportunity to, okay, we're down in sales, but let's invest in the facilities. Let's make adjustments for short term, but also long term, and different headcount, as I just mentioned, Joe. So that is quite unique that you guys had that opportunity to take advantage of the circumstances there.
Well, and in our case specifically, all of the, again, those adaptations that Chris is talking about, our restaurants, specifically our Zaxby's restaurants, I mean, they're back-to-back boothing around the perimeter. So when we opened, it was, just as simple as, every other booth, right? That's what we did. We removed half of the tables, but we had some, I would say 2 or 3 weeks of, that critical what Chris was talking about, where we said, okay, so I mean, our facility only allows for maybe 4 cars, right, between where you order and where they get their food. How do we elongate that? We don't have someone outside. How do I, run 100 foot of cable to get equipment outside so we can help expedite the process? How do we found a natural problem of when the dining rooms were closed was there are a lot of commercial truck drivers in my area. And I had a friend of mine personally who was like, I can't get food anywhere because there's no dining rooms open. And I shared that with our ownership, and we printed banners. We have empty parking lots. So we printed banners with the store number and said, big trucks, give us a call. And that was wildly successful. But in those 2 or 3 weeks of us going, what are we going to do to survive? We got off the hook because we immediately were served up double digits through the drive-through and say, well, wait a minute, we're not going to have to fight to survive. Now we can invest to improve. And that's, what all these guys are talking about. Yeah, we just grew and invested in, again, the extra maintenance hands were housekeeping, so what Kevin said, I didn't have to third party it. Thankfully, I was able to invest in the right products when they were available. And we were able to just, maintenance assault a location on a given morning and just top to bottom it.
And looking at, Chris, I don't know, were you about to say something on?
Yeah, I was going to say so on the sanitizing stuff, we kind of did the same thing. From what Joe said, we brought in some dollars and definitely put it into getting the restaurants fogged and stuff like that. But we learned from putting out those dollars what exactly was the right method. And there really isn't any certifications or anything around here. We were able to do it, in-house. So that was a huge plus. And the other thing I was going to say, Joe, is in our area too, I kind of saw what you were seeing With the parking lots, we had a lot of restaurants around here that just had chains and snakes of cars going around the buildings, using the parking lots as to-go areas and stuff like that. So, yeah, kudos to you guys.
Yeah, and I mean, on the note of the cleaning, and as we look forward beyond, COVID and this time period, is that something that's here to stay? That type of investment in the deep cleaning? Because we all keep up with the facilities. We try to stay as clean as possible, but I imagine that was a first for that thorough of a cleaning, using that type of equipment and chemical. Is that something that's going to be here to stay?
I'm not sure. We've talked about it. We're still in talks about should we continue that. So the jury's still out. Unfortunately, I think it all for us. Again, we don't have the inside help to be able to do it ourselves. I wish we did. I think that whole staffing piece will dictate that as we move along. I can tell you over the past 3 months with the staffing situation, I've been talking about having that company come back in besides the sanitation, just a real good deep cleaning piece because we just haven't had the uh, people to put that effort into like we used to a year ago or a year and a half ago. So,
Yeah, and I think for us, I think we, having the internal team, we have a staff of, we call them asset management, but we were able to kind of utilize that staff to do some of the spraying and stuff like that. I think that we're kind of in the ramp down phase now, but we're letting the customers kind of dictate whether or not, that's something we're going to end up doing long term or not. And I think that we've got it figured out now down to a science. We know how to do it. We know how much it costs. We know how long it takes. Um, I'm kind of curious as we go into, as hopefully as COVID starts to progress and go away as a, a initial threat. I'm wondering, next year when flu season comes around and things like that up in the Northeast here a little farther, that's a thing for us, and we usually lose staff for that. I don't know if some of the things that we learned from COVID will actually transfer over into normal everyday life. If COVID is still a thing, if we'll continue on, those are definitely conversations we're still having as well. But fortunately, I think we learned a lot of lessons, and our staff learned a lot of lessons too. So I think that just training them on how to, sanitize the handles and sanitize all the high touch areas and stuff like that, I think those kinds of things will live on for a while. And I think in some cases, I think they should. And in some cases, it's just a giant pain in the butt. But I think, I think long term, you'll definitely see some things carry over from what we learned.
And from a health inspector or any sort of compliance related issues, has there been any changes, official changes along those lines?
not that I've seen, particularly from the state health agencies.
Yeah.
Nothing has changed.
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, there for a while. Um, they, of course, everybody, the state agencies weren't coming around and checking like they used to. But when they did start coming back around, they were just really concerned with hand washing stations. Making sure that soaps and everything was set up right and they were the correct distances and stuff like that. But that's all compliance stuff that we would normally do anyway. They just put a little bit more emphasis on it.
So those deep cleanings, those were essentially voluntary on your end, making sure that you were doing everything you could.
Yeah, and it was mostly for the staff, really. I mean, when you're trying to put people at ease about coming to work and serving people and wearing masks and gloves if they were in the back of house or something like that, it's definitely, it makes them feel better knowing that the restaurant is getting basically reset to zero at some point, and that they're not going to come in and pick it up, just walking around, or if there was potential cases or anything like that. It's nice. I think it's more of a, you know just a peace of mind for them.
Yeah. And looking at, and you guys hit on technology a little bit as we continue the theme of looking forward past COVID. You guys use third-party delivery services quite a bit. What other role or what other technologies did you guys use, whether it be communication or just advertisement, whatever it may be. How did technology get you guys through this as well?
Well, I think Zaxby's has done a big push on their online application as well, and the use of it and getting more members to use online apps. And I think our guests at the store realize, or perceived anyway, that if they use the online app, they're going to get a better service, quicker service experience, real or perceived. So I think they've gotten a lot of participation. So that has changed. As far as other technology, Joe alluded to the throughput at the drive-through. I mean, when 70% of your business, if we go back to normal, or 80, you've got to be able to put more cars through. And when you have a 4-car stack or a 5-car stack, they're experimenting with new technology, iPad ordering, so you can go way past the order board. We could argue whether it's really faster or if it gives the guest more of a perception, but it gives the kitchen more production time so that by the time they get to the window, it speeds up that window time very well. So there's a lot of investment being done by the licensees, ourselves including, with the investment in iPads, and there's some Wi-Fi requirements and the ability to pay outside by card. And so a lot of people, I think Joe was alluding to, they handmade some pay stations outside, which I would never do for part of the reason of where we have businesses are not the best parts of town. I wouldn't even think about it, but there's technology that will allow us to do that. And so we're looking into a lot of that right now. And I'm assuming Joe is doing that as well, but.
Yeah, it's a lot of, again, Zaxby's has done a very good job supporting us during this. With the ramp up of the third party, there's a lot of, they have improved in some areas that the ordering system and how it translates to the kitchen, what we see has become a different system, right? They go from, right, I have 8 people's orders in front of me now instead of 4. How do we streamline that? Our system was built to look at 4 orders at a time. Well, we want to give the kitchen every chance they can, to serve the guest as quickly as they can. And so, yeah, Zaxby's has rolled out a lot of improvements. And, we have Dairy Queen on the other side of ours, and they equally did the same. So it hasn't been anything on our part that we had to engage in. And I'm a technology head. I love to automate everything, but I was doing that, before COVID, and those things didn't really come into play or be helpful. But our, franchisors really reached out and saw the needs, and they provided what we needed. Like I said, we actually didn't go to building outside because we saw very quickly we didn't have to. We were prepared to run 100 feet of cable and take orders there, and then we went, okay, maybe not. But so from a technology side, definitely a kudos to our parent companies.
Yeah, Chris, you didn't have that luxury.
No, so we on a different level, we definitely invested in our to-go software, ramped it up, pushed it out to a couple other locations. So yes, there was a portion of that was directly related to food ordering and things like that. But for the most part, it just kind of changed how we did business in our front office. We're a very social group. So, like I said, our Monday meetings were all, in a room. We all sat around and talked about what was going to happen. And Friday meetings were kind of similar. So for us, obviously we went to Zoom for all that stuff, and there was a difference in communication on how I pushed out information to all the restaurants and how they pushed information to us. So it really changed kind of the way that we communicate within the company, to the point where those meetings actually changed formats dramatically. In the last couple of months, we've actually blown up our past, kind of how we did things and reworked it because it wasn't needed anymore, because we were able to push out the information in a different way. We didn't have to sit and talk about it. So we're using those meetings for different things now, and it's changed a little bit of kind of how things flow around the company, which is interesting to watch. And then, from a perspective of outside vendors, it's made people more comfortable and made me less. So you can now zoom into a contractor and have a conversation that you normally would have in person, or have to meet on a job site or something like that. And sometimes, you'd get there and have the conversation that lasted 5 minutes, but you had to meet, so you had to drive a half an hour and sit in traffic and the whole 9 yards. And I think people now are more comfortable with, the online platforms and FaceTimes and things like that. So it's kind of been a little bit of a blessing in disguise for us. I can operate a little bit higher level from an office perspective and not have to be everywhere at one time and be able to get information in and out quicker. So it's definitely been a change, but I think a positive change for sure.
Yeah, a lot of people look at corporate as the industries that are realized they don't need office space, they don't need that in person um, part of their job. And I mean, you made a great point there, where now people, they are forced to get comfortable with these platforms, to have FaceTime, to Zoom, whatever it may be. And to your point, I mean, that's going to give you back a tremendous amount of time and take away from the drive time, the gas there, so on and so forth. So that forced, I guess, adoption of technology, I'm sure you guys are going to continue to see the benefits of that moving forward. Well, this has been really great. Picking each one of your brains about kind of the impact that it had on each of your unique situations. I certainly appreciate the time, and we'll go around one more time. Any parting words or any comments about this last year and the industry moving forward? And again, Chris, we'll start with you.
So I think the two things that I kind of pulled out of this whole thing is there's operators and, in my world, subcontractors we use on a daily basis. And there were some that just never really picked up the ball and ran with it. They just kind of accepted defeat and went about their business as usual. And I think you'll see a separation happen between the companies, that took what they were given and made the best of it and pushed forward and innovated and did things. And it sounds like everybody on this call was in a good situation there. But you'll also see the ones that didn't, start to kind of really struggle. And I think that we're seeing that with a lot of subcontractors. We're seeing that with it's kind of made us rethink a little bit about, who we're getting to do business with and how we're going to do business moving forward. From a facility side, and I think you kind of touched on it, I think it almost forced us to operate at 130%. So now I feel like that 130% is now the new 100%. You're not going to be able to go and kind of give those excuses of, well, we can't get it done because of this. If we got it done in the pandemic, then we can get it done. And it's just for my guys and for everybody we talk to, been a little eye-opening to see the potential in people come out. And some people rose to the occasion and some people didn't. But I think it was an interesting. It was, if nothing else, it pointed to a lot of things in the restaurants that we could do better, that we could change for the better. So I kind of look at it as a blessing in disguise. I know, certainly the pandemic was not a blessing, but if you're going to take something from it, I felt like you could definitely look around and see, who you were in with and who you weren't in with. So I'm kind of utilizing that on the facility side to make some changes moving forward and pick the best people for the right positions.
Yeah. And Kevin, we'll go with you.
Yeah, I love what Chris just said. I think I try to look at the glass half full and why nobody wanted this to happen. I think it just exposed how resilient as a team we are, not only internally, but externally as a group, of fraternity of folks, so to speak, the successful ones. I think the teamwork that has come and the creativity that has come has been outstanding. But Chris hit it right on the head. The productivity that has come out of this. And maybe we don't want to go the guardrail we're at right now, but it clearly shows that when we put our minds to it, we can be creative and efficient. And I think that's what we've all tried to do, make the best out of what we had. And it's been quite remarkable to see, quite honestly, and keeping positive attitudes. The one other piece that we didn't talk about that I'm seeing is this whole workforce issue is bigger than just us at this table. It's all our suppliers. It's the people who manufacture our sauces and what have you. I mean, it's not unusual for me to have a truck delivery delayed by a day because they don't have truck drivers, or you name it. We're out of sauce because the manufacturer didn't have enough people to make it. So it goes much deeper than right here at this level. And I just hope that our guests and people smarter than us at this table understand that and can educate the folks about it, because it's tough sometimes dealing with the general public when they don't understand. They're always right, but the reality is they're not always right. But they need to understand, and there's a lot on social media now about giving praise to the restaurant workers for how hard they are working, and understanding what they put up with. And so it's a great industry, still is a great industry, and I have to believe that we will survive this and come out better.
Yeah, and Chris, I think you mentioned that you had something else on that point.
Yeah, so I think that's a huge point. What Kevin said about it going farther than this table. So one of the things that has been kind of I'm not going to say a bright spot, but kind of something I take to the meetings is the excuses that people give about what they can't do and why they can't do it, has been shocking. Some of the stuff that we've come back with from our equipment vendors and freight companies and all these different places that we deal with has been super interesting. And I think that not only the pandemic, but we also had the Texas freeze, the Suez Canal. We've had all these crazy things happen in the year, and it's been piled on a little bit. But man, ordering equipment and trying to get things in and freight has been a huge challenge. And I look forward to the excuses, because it just makes me work that much harder trying to find a way around it to prove that it is in fact possible, and you can't just stop everything because of COVID or because Texas froze. And while I understand that's definitely a thing and it's definitely affected a lot of the industries, man, it feels like people are just using it as a huge crutch to not be able to deliver when they say they are or what they say they are.
Yeah, and I mean, I kind of roll my eyes at some point where we're all in this together. Well, we really are all in it together, and we are fighting it. And just because we are going through the crazy set of circumstances that any one of us has ever seen, doesn't mean we can't do it. I mean, we've all hit it on the head earlier as far as the resiliency that we've seen, and this is with different organizations and different parts of the company. And just by human nature, we have the ability to get creative and work around a solution. So I'm right there with you, Chris, where I'm interested whenever someone has as an excuse, but it's not like they're the only ones going through it. And so, let's get our heads together, put our heads together, and see what we can do to overcome this. And Joe, you're shaking your head earlier.
Oh, well, the equipment, yeah, just the accessibility issue that Kevin brought up, and that was what I wanted to tap on and just say, right, it's from a facility side, now we're dealing with, right, the excuse to every issue is, well, COVID. Sorry. Well, what do you mean there's 6 weeks it used to take me? Well, COVID. Yeah. Well, do I tell our guests that we're just not going to have chicken because you don't have a truck driver to deliver the food? Well, COVID. It's like, you know, the resiliency, Kevin used the word resiliency, it sounds like all of our operations are very similar, and it gave us an opportunity to serve our staff and to really show valued them, right? The villainy of corporations, right, is on display for everyone to see. And so for organizations to say, well, let me bring in a third party to clean everything, let me make sure you understand, we have a lot of high school age kids who work in our industry, and we're dealing with a lot of parents explaining to them, we're doing everything we can to protect your children. And then, thank you, Georgia, and, the South, because our fans and our guests here, I can say, have been phenomenal. It also gave us an opportunity to really connect with our communities. Again, there's no, hey, the bright side of COVID, right? I mean, terrible. This is horrible, but the community that is here, right? The resiliency that it shows and the support we received back is very encouraging. There were people who did go out of their way to thank, the reason you're waiting so long isn't for the fault of the people who showed up to work today. They're the ones getting it done for the people who aren't here. And most people in our party extended a lot of grace and a lot of love, and that's the culture, it sounds like, that exists in all of our organizations here. And that was the best of anything reflection on, what we can take from it. and that going forward, we just continue on the same with that valuation of our people and our guests, and the technology will change, the policies will change, and or they won't, but the culture stays the same.
Very well said. Well, gentlemen, once again, thank you for making the time. It's been a pleasure catching up with you, each one of you guys, and appreciate your unique perspectives on this last year that we've all gone through. And I'm happy to hear that everyone here has had at least taken some positives out of the circumstances. And I'm excited to see where each one of us are here in the next 12 months. But I'll let each of you get back to it, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Good chatting with you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Modern Facilities Management Podcast. Make sure to subscribe to future episodes and visit our website, stratumcommunity.com, for more facilities management content.